Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I rise today to speak to the amendment. I appreciate the sentiment behind the amendment that as proposed by the member for Vermilion-Lloyd-Minster, and I also would like to thank him for providing that amendment. I think we saw it a couple of hours ago, so we had some time to consider it, which is very much appreciated. I do, however, have to disagree with his analysis. So I think by way of history, it's important to clarify a couple of things. First off, this amendment is what's called a clarifying amendment. So currently it's the case that the Act indicates that the Commission can use other more recent data. It's just not very specific about what it is. So this amendment would simply clarify the ability of the Commission to use this information, and in fact, in the 2009-10 redrawing of the boundaries, this information was used by the Electoral Boundary Commission. I think another thing that's really critical to note is that Alberta, as a jurisdiction, has one of the largest variances. So we allow a 25% variance in our margins, and what this does is it tends to allow wider variances as between jurisdictions. So it tends to mean that in certain areas, usually rural areas, there are fewer people voting for each elected member. And again, in Alberta, this is bigger than in other places, and that has been left the same. So that was the case previously, and that will be the case after this passes. The difficulty with using the decennial census information is that it has a disproportionate impact with respect to different regions in Alberta. So it creates a sort of a deep unfairness with respect to certain areas. Particularly, they tend to be areas that are rapidly growing. So just by way of example, since the last federal census was conducted in 2011, Edmonton has increased by 12.4%, or about 105,000 people, and Calgary has increased by 13.3%, or about 150,000 people. So that's a significant increase in that time period, those estimates. So the result of this is that, even though we're expecting federal census data to start rolling out in about a year, this won't be soon enough to allow the Commission to consider it. And so this would create sort of a deep unfairness to places that are rapidly growing, because having old information considered in their case has a disproportionate effect relative to places who are not growing as rapidly. This, combined with the fact that we have the sort of higher allowable variance, would create some, I think, unintended consequences. So some other things that I think are worth noting. I had the opportunity, fortunately, to speak with the Chief Electoral Officer on this matter. He is supportive of the inclusion of municipal census data, so of allowing the Commission to consider municipal census data. He also indicated a couple of important things, I think, to note about the province, or about the process. So one of them is that for municipalities without current data, they're asked to give input to the Commission. So if municipalities have grown and they're not taking census data, that input can be considered in other ways by the Commission. In addition, municipalities also have a tendency to update mapping, so they can submit mapping that shows new subdivisions, so that material is taken into account also. So I think this is simply to say that the Electoral Boundaries Commission considers more than just the numbers. So municipalities who don't have those numbers are still able to give input. In addition, a significant number of municipalities actually do this work. So 37 municipalities completed census in 2014, and 42 municipalities completed census in 2015. So it isn't just the large cities. So overall, I think there are a number of reasons to see that this census information will actually create greater fairness. Input is allowed from all areas, so if there are concerns about certain municipalities and their methodology, there's no reason why that input couldn't be received by the Commission. But really what they're asking for is just for express statutory authority to consider that information which they have already been considering in the past, and information which is more up to date, which creates greater fairness for faster growing parts of the province. So as a result of that, and as a result of the support of the Chief Electoral Officer, who I believe, Madam Chair, in this instance would be considered the expert on what data is relevant and what data is best considered by the Commission, I would urge all members to vote against the amendment. Thank you.